I think
That's impressive.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I feel a bit silly saying this, but I think I should still say it. My name is Irina Bokova, and I'm president of the Women's International Forum. Welcome to WIF's first event of the calendar year 2021. We are so pleased to have all of you here today. And our topic today is culture and education as a foundation for peace and cooperation. What can we do better and differently? A conversation of Irina Bokova, immediate past Director-General of UNESCO. So first, let me thank and acknowledge our speaker, Ms. Irina Bokova, who is here. You can see her on your screen. She's joining us from Paris, where it's 8 p.m. So thank you, a big thank you on behalf of WIF. I'd also like to thank our WIF members for their continued support of our programs. We are delighted to see so many of you here today and always participating in our Zoom events. So thank you very much. Although most of you will be familiar with our Zoom events and the format and the rules, I'd just like to briefly remind you to keep your microphones muted so that we can hear the speaker clearly and without any interruptions. So following the speaker's opening remarks, we will have a moderator-led discussion, after which I will open up the session for questions from the floor. So if you would like to ask questions, please indicate your name on the chat function on the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen, and I will call you in the order that your name appears. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite my friend and colleague, Pascal Fabre, who is our one of our executive board members, and also the spouse of the Belgian ambassador to the United Nations, to introduce Irina. Pascal, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you to WIF, and thank you to you, Irina, and of course thank you, Irina. It's such an honor and pleasure to see you again, and well, even if it's online, a bit frustrating for everyone, but we have to keep up with that, and that's how it is for the moment. So I had the immense pleasure of meeting Irina when I was in Paris, and she was in Paris. At that time, she was ambassador of Bulgaria to France, to UNESCO, and also to the OIF, the International Francophone Organization. And after that, so when she went on with UNESCO, and my husband had the pleasure to work with her, first in Paris and then in New York. So Irina is an incredible person. She was born in Bulgaria. She studied in Bulgaria and then in Moscow. And she, at that time, and I think before and also in Moscow, perfected her knowledge of languages. And I can tell you one memory I have very striking is her acceptance speech at UNESCO, where she switched from one language to the other, 4 of the languages of the official languages of the UN, without any problem switching from one to the other: French, Russian, English, Spanish, and she speaks perfectly the 4 languages, which is quite impressive, on top of a good Bulgarian, of course. Irina started her career, and she was, of course, from the beginning interested in international affairs, and she switched from a diplomatic position to political positions because she was twice in the parliament. And Irina, I think, has this profound conviction, but she will tell us, of course, more than I do, that multilateralism is a key for peace, for development, for equality. First, she was very instrumental in the European integration of her country to the EU. I think at that time, former communist countries saw it as really a chance, not only, of course, of economic development, but also of keeping peace and making sure that things will go forward and not backwards in their countries. And I think this conviction is important. And then, of course, multilateral. She worked first, so as I said, as ambassador in Paris, where she worked as ambassador to France, but also and to Monaco, but also with UNESCO and the OEF. And her francophone conviction is also very, very strong. I remember her coming to the international symposium of Alliance Française that we had every year, addressing the crowd of the president of Alliance Française in Paris and telling them how much francophonie was important for her. And of course, UNESCO. And when she was elected at the head of UNESCO, first woman, and I think this is important. This is also big pride for all of us to have a woman for the first time at the head of such an important international organization. And also this conviction, again, that multilateralism was a key for the development of the world. She went through very difficult times at UNESCO, the US withdrawal, and that was not so easy to cope with. It's of course, like any UN agency, sometimes becomes very political, but the question of budgets, of course, is key, and it's going to be very painful. And she had a mandate that was outstanding, having also to face crisis, international crisis, and the question of looting of heritage in some countries, which is a very complicated and difficult question, but she managed to have a consensus that heritage sites and heritage should be protected at all costs, even during conflicts. And she also, of course, had a big role in education, because UNESCO is education, science, and culture. And this conviction that culture and science and education are the heart of the development, and that's where things lie. I think she will explain to us. So I'm very, very pleased to see Irina again today and to see all of you. And I'm very happy that she can talk to us and that she will enlighten us a little bit more about this question of education and culture in this a bit crazy world now, and what can we do better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal. Irina, please.
Thank you very much, Zarina. Thank you very much, Pascal. If you have seen me in real terms, you will see that I blushed a lot when Pascal was speaking. But thank you very much for your kind presentation and also for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be with you, a group of professional women who have a very deep commitment to the United Nations. And I would say that it's a very important moment. On one side, of course, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, 75th anniversary of the establishment of UNESCO, my very dear organization, and to which I served for 8 years. And also to remind us about what multilateralism stands for. We, of course, last year also should have celebrated, and we celebrated, but digitally, the 25th anniversary of the Beijing conference and the so important declaration on women, peace and development, the Beijing Plan of Action, which still stays as probably the most progressive document in the area of women. 20th anniversary of the, I would say once again, historic resolution of the Security Council on women, peace and security. And of course, 5 years after the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris Climate Agreement. So you see how many occasions, I would say, we had to look at the contribution of the United Nations. And of course, the COVID situation created an unprecedented crisis in the world, both in terms of economic fall down. The Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, spoke about probably 25 years losing of 25 years of achievements in development. And I would not like to elaborate long at all the different aspects, negative aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I would rather say that and I would say because of this pandemic, there is a lot more need of international cooperation, because we know that nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. In an interconnected world, albeit we know that some of the decisions are taken by national governments, still we have to look at the common good, the commonality of our challenges and also of the solutions. Now, because you asked me to concentrate a little bit, I will say a few words about education and culture, and then I hope we can go into a more kind of a dialogue, exchange mode. Now, COVID-19 came with a devastating impact on education. We have seen lockdowns, more than more than 1.6 billion children were in a lockdown around the world. There were millions of schools that have been closed between 3.5 months to 5 months, and the impact on learning, it's really huge. Now, on one side, and I think it's very important also to mention that we were already in a learning crisis because of the bad quality of education. There were, and still before the crisis, before the pandemic, there were almost 500 million children that were not learning. They were in schools, they have passed probably some primary education, but they were, after schooling, they were functionally, I would say, illiterate. They were just not learning. And the biggest challenge, which is inscribed into the goal number 4 of the Sustainable Development Agenda on education, it is about quality education, it's about learning. And then, of course, COVID came. Now, we know that we moved online, digital, and it helped a lot, but I don't believe it can solve all the problems. And maybe we could discuss also some of the ideas that came. I would say the foundation of human development is education. The foundation of sustainable development is, of course, education. And unfortunately, with all the very big fiscal responses that governments around the world have made, and I have looked at figures, they have been 11.8 trillion global fiscal response, only 0.78% goes to education, which means 91 billion. And 73 billion out of this 91 are in the high revenue countries. So we can see what happens, what is the impact of education globally and also in the world. And we have to know that going to school, it's not just learning. Schooling is socializing. Schooling is kids going to learn about certain values. It is important to, schooling also is a mix of all different backgrounds. It's about children knowing how to work in teams, how to work in a society. These skills, social skills, are very important for young people and for children. And not to speak, of course, about difficulties in some of the least developed countries where school provides also food and some other support. So far for education. And for culture, also the impact is quite, I would say, negative because of the lockdowns, museums, World Heritage sites. The impact on the cultural industry is devastating, and there is a special need to work into this. I'm very proud, because you asked me to speak about peace and culture and others, that for the first time in the SDG agenda, culture has been recognized. Maybe not to the extent that we wanted, but still in some of the objectives, in some of the goals, we have their culture. Because I do believe that if the Sustainable Development Agenda is about the people, it is also about the culture. Without it, we cannot actually make it close to the people, understandable to the people, and at the end of the day, achieve the results that we want to achieve. So I stop here, Zarina, and maybe we go more into a dialogue mode.
Thank you. Thank you, Irina, for the extensive and very, very thoughtful opening remarks. if you don't mind, I'd like to start with a personal question. As Pascal has noted when she introduced you, you were the first woman to be Director-General of UNESCO. UNESCO was founded in 1945. After all these years, you were the first to be elected. And do you think you broke the glass ceiling by becoming the first DG of UNESCO? And how did you use your position to bring about gender parity in UNESCO?
Of course, I'm proud that I'm the first woman, but it doesn't mean that, and I'm very happy that after me was another woman that was elected. I think this was very important because I believe in women supporting women. I have seen during my life, my professional career, when I was younger, I have to confess that I was very much against quotas, all this talk about quotas, that positive kind of place or discrimination of women, because I thought that we are the same, we have the same qualities, and we have to achieve everything by ourselves. And then life taught me that, unfortunately, it's such a slow progress going that we need, at least as an interim kind of a measure, we really need these quotas. We need to push so that there is what I would call a critical mass of women that are there, and then it becomes natural for women and for men to occupy different positions. We see how difficult it is for women on boards. Even the European Union couldn't adopt a decision for some kind of a quota for women on boards, and it's European Union where we know that both in terms of political participation and other women are indeed quite advanced. So, and also I believe in example. I never thought that I will go to many countries and young girls will be looking at me as an example with hope. And I have been, I remember vividly in Jordan. I went to one second chance school where dropouts, young girls, dropouts were taking classes. And when I was asking what they want to be, and one of them told me, Director-General of UNESCO. I was so happy. I thought this is fantastic that in some small village somewhere, somebody wants to become. And I said, of course you can. And not only there, in many parts of the world, I have seen. So if I could encourage, I was happy that I could encourage girls to think big and to albeit their backgrounds and others. What I did first, when I came, the higher positions at UNESCO, 23% of the high positions were occupied by women. I put myself as a goal to have half of them, 50-50. First, I gave example with my senior management team. For the first time, my senior management team was half women, half men. Before that, there were women, but it was one only deputy director, usually culture or education, never science, or some of the others. So, or never, no, management, there was one before. So anyway, I achieved this. And also at director positions, even at the director positions, 63% were women. I think it was important because very many times we were getting together around the table, discussing an issue, and there were women, director of the financial services or iOS or some of the others. And I think this was really very important. It gave a very different perspective for the organization. And if I couple that, and I want to mention this, because I made a big effort also to diversify geographically the organization, to have geographical distribution. And when I left, we had 167 countries represented at UNESCO against the background of a not very big staff because of the less budget constraints. I really think it was an important, but you have to be constantly on the watch if you want this to happen.
Thank you for that response. And you're right. You're so right that representation is important. An example to young girls on what they can aspire to. if you don't mind, we can move on to the culture and education part of the talk. In particular, if you address culture and cultural heritage, would you agree that for the longest time, culture and cultural heritage has been absent in the dialogue on peace and sustainable development? How did you, as DG of UNESCO, bring this component to the forefront? And in what way can this work be continued at the grassroots and community level?
Zarina, I agree with you that for a very long time, culture and cultural heritage preservation was considered only to be kind of a domain of experts, of lovers, or some cultural tourism that was doing, but it was not considered to be that important for the overall development. And I think life brought it back into the forefront because of what we have seen, the rise of violent extremism, the destruction of heritage. And I think it was bizarre and oddly enough, extremists knew the value of heritage and how they will all hurt the world. So when this destruction started, we kind of, and the world woke up to its importance. In fact, just in 2 months, in March, there will be the 20th anniversary of a very sad event. This is the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas. And in fact, yesterday evening, I was at a very interesting discussion with the Afghan permanent delegate, Adel Ras, Ambassador Adel Ras. We were together at a debate in Washington, of course, online with the International Center for Strategic Studies. I think it's important that such think tanks are interested in this, talking about Afghanistan. And also because I'm a member of the board of an NGO in Washington, ARCH, that are very much involved into the protection of heritage in conflict zones. And we once again launched an appeal to include the protection of heritage in the negotiations between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan, precisely to change the narrative and to give a different perspective for the future of Afghanistan. Then, of course, we saw what happened in Mali with the destruction of the mausoleums and Mali, and burning of manuscripts. And we know the history of Mali for thousands of years, centuries, that were keeping this wisdom, Islamic wisdom of medicine, of philosophy, of botanics, of everything. And then, of course, Syria and Iraq. And this is where we made a big effort at UNESCO to get out of the culture box. And to go to the security people, to the people that are in peace and security, and of course the Security Council, and to tell them that this is not just our concern, is not just because we love aesthetics, but because this is an attack on identities of people, against identities of people. They want to destroy the very fabric of societies. They don't want a future. They want to erase our common past in order to erase the common future of humanity, and that it is not an innocent thing. And I'm happy that we could achieve several landmark resolutions of the Security Council against the illicit trafficking of art, against looting of sites, and then I would say the first ever resolution in March to 2017 on 2347 resolution, which put a direct link between peace, security, and protection of heritage and diversity. I think this is very important because extremists wanted to give a different narrative. Diversity, I think, is so important in this area. So I think now there is more kind of a bigger understanding about what and why culture and heritage matter. We know that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the former Yugoslavia, the wars, there was the bridge of Mostar, which was blown and then rebuilt. I think it's highly symbolic act in order to show that there can be bridges between different communities.
Thank you. And following up on your thoughts on that question, can you share with us how can we create a culture of peace, and how can this lead to empowerment of women and girls?
You know, I deeply believe that what we need is really the link between culture and education, the link between heritage and education. It is so important that cultural heritage protection is understood wider, as I said, and just a cultural issue. This is where I believe it's important that in the Sustainable Development Agenda, in the goal 11 on urban development, sustainable urban development, there is a direct target which is about heritage protection. And of course, in many other of the sustainable development goals, there is some kind of a link also to culture and to heritage. Why I say this? Because I believe the Sustainable Development Agenda is about what we want to achieve and how we want to achieve it. So on one side, we want to achieve indeed protection of heritage. We want to preserve our urban landscapes, historic landscapes, our urban environment, or what we have it. Actually, Zarina, looking at you, what comes to my mind is the Botanic Garden in Singapore, which was inscribed on the World Heritage List in 2015. And I visited it before, and it's amazing. It's in the city center. It's a mixture of historic buildings, of course, and science from the 19th century until now. And what is very interesting to know, it is that it was inscribed not as a natural site, but as a cultural site, because it is exactly linked with the urban environment. So if you want to develop Singapore as a modern city, the Botanic Garden is an integral part of it. And you're proud of it, and you feel that it's part of your identity, isn't it? Absolutely. So there are plenty of such examples that can be given in order to show the very intimate link that can mobilize people around achieving a certain goal.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Very kind of you for pointing out
I'm just
the Botanical Garden. And what for me is another thrill is the street food culture in Singapore. It's also now been accorded the UNESCO status. And again, it's about identities. Culture is very much linked to identity, and preserving street food culture, it's something that is inherent to the identity of many societies, and it is also a nod to diversity. So in that sense, yes, these are very important part of identity of a country and what it means to be, Singaporean or American or French, for example.
And this is the intangible aspect. I didn't speak about that, but it is also extremely important.
Exactly. I'm going to ask another question on education, and then I will open up to the floor. There are a few who have indicated that they would like to ask a question. You know very well that education can lead to peace and be part of building back better by supporting the transformation of the security situation, political institutions, economic regeneration, and social development. However, education policies can also contribute to the escalation of conflict if they are poorly designed or implemented. Please share with us your thoughts on how education can be used as a foundation for peace and cooperation.
I think, Zarina, this is really a very important question because it goes to the very heart, I believe, of education and the very heart of UNESCO. Why UNESCO was created immediately after the Second World War, the debate about such an organization, such an agency started during the war. When in the UK there was the first meeting of ministers of education of some of the allied countries, precisely because they thought that education is very much needed in order to secure peace differently. And this is where the first lines of UNESCO Constitution, which were penned by the American poet and librarian of Congress at that time, MacLeish, which says, since war starts in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. I think this is the essence. We go back now with the Sustainable Development Agenda and goal number 4 to the very purpose of education, because education is really about building people. What kind of people we want young people want to get out of education. And that is why we put a target there. And target number 7 in the goal number 4 is about global citizenship education. This is about education for peace, about mutual respect, about tolerance, about respect for nature, about climate, understanding about biodiversity, about living together. And this is, I believe, the essence of what education stands for. So if you have a curricular, and UNESCO has been doing a lot in terms of reviewing of curricular, for that matter. I remember when I went to Iraq, when Daesh occupied a big part of Iraq and destroyed the Mosul Museum. And I was thinking about it. I went to Iraq and I was talking to the prime minister at the time. And I said, what can we do also in order for your young people not to go into the hands of these extremists? And then he asked us to make a review of their textbooks. Mm-hmm. He said, young Iraqis maybe have forgotten that we are a very diverse country, that we have layers of history, of different religions that have been living together peacefully. And we did this review and recommended for their textbooks. So education is vital, I believe, for peace.
Thank you for that, Irina. I'd like now to invite some of our participants to ask questions, and I already see the several people who put up their hand. I'd like to invite first Betty Robbins and then followed by Tracy. So Betty, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Zarina. I'm going to first thank you so much, Irina, for what you do at UNESCO and for talking with us today. I'm going to go back at first to the beginning of the conversation about education and ask further your thoughts on what we, a group of women from all over the world, might focus on to help children whose education has been impeded by the pandemic. You did talk about the importance of mentorship. I wonder if you have other ideas, and then to extend it to the very important topic of preservation of cultural icons. Give us your ideas on what we could focus on or should focus on as well, if you have ideas about that.
Thank you very much, Betty, for both questions. I think you can do a lot, and I'm just going to share some ideas, particularly about education. What I think we need nowadays is really some kind of a bold ideas to promote something different. We speak about building back better. We rely on technology, and technology has just stormed our houses. In any case, it was there, but the pace of acceleration of technology in every single walk of our lives is just amazing. It's unprecedented, and everything that is linked, we will see artificial intelligence and others. But we should not forget that half of the world population do not have access to internet. It's more than 3.5 billion people do not have access to internet. And I believe when we speak about education and how education and learning can be moved online and others, I think we need really to promote some ideas and to make a strong advocacy for having an access to internet as a kind of a human right. I'm not far from this idea that we really need to promote it as a human right. It reminds me a little bit like the debate we had on drinking water. If you remember some years ago, and we were saying, some people say, look, human beings, we all need, drinking water. And they were telling it's expensive, it's complicated, it's this and this and that. And then it was affirmed, adopted as a human right. So I think something similar should happen. Maybe I'm going too far, but something should happen also with the access to digital, to the internet. This is the way we live. This is the way we will look after our health, the way we communicate with others, educating and others. And if we do not give the same access to the people around the world, I think we will be all in a big trouble. It won't be the world that we want to build. And this is where such kind of an advocacy is very much needed nowadays in order to promote this type of idea. So this is what comes to my mind as to education. And of course, the second and very important is just investment. And education should be on the political agenda of politicians, of decision makers and others. If it is not on the political agenda, it will always be falling somewhere within the cracks of systems, because there are competing, I would say, agendas. But education is just vital for that. In terms of heritage, I think there are many nowadays also causes that need a lot of advocacy. Illicit trafficking of art, looting of sites, I would say, think in real terms when tourists are going somewhere, visiting places or others, the simple message that it's not moral, it is not right to do this, needs indeed a lot of effort. And generally, I think it's just the knowledge about it. The World Heritage Sites, which are more than 1,000, I think 1,121, if I'm not mistaken. It's just an open book of diversity, of everything that humanity has created during the history. And knowing about it and talking about it is so important nowadays. I have always said I'm quite passionate about it, and I stop here, but I think that heritage, knowledge about heritage is not that much about the past. Of course, it is about the past, but it is also about the future. It is about what kind of world we want to live in, what kind of a humanity we want to live in. So knowledge about it, making more advocacy for that, I think is critical in this changing geopolitics and in this world.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you, Betty, for the excellent question. I'd like to invite Tracy to ask a question.
Yes, thank you very much. Wonderful ideas, and you've really sparked a lot of, I think, maybe in part imagination with that last comment about what we could do, perhaps with technology. I work with a lot of teachers in over 40 different countries around the world, and I have to thank you for two things that are on the UNESCO site, which were absolutely fundamental in keeping some schools actually going. When they were not allowed to go to the public library or museums, we pointed them to the UNESCO museum site or the World Heritage sites. And when teachers were desperate for leadership, because some of our countries were not necessarily guiding processes, there was a lot of wonderful publications, including this framework for reopening schools and guidelines around distance education. And I think even though we could share that same information, the fact that it came from UNESCO carried a lot of weight. And I think it convinced a lot of people about the potential and benefits of actually deciding to move forward. So I wanted to thank you for that. And I did want to ask you about a big, bold idea. You said that it's time for these big, bold ideas. I think that in some of the courses that I teach, the real focus is on self-knowledge and also on just how do humans learn. And one of the things that we know at the essence of this is that you know yourself better by knowing the other. And the more others you know in the world, the more refined your own self-understanding is. And I think that I really love that the course that I get to teach, which is online at Harvard University, is full of students from 19 different nationalities. And I have never seen a better experience. They all walk away saying they've learned so much from their peers, their classmates, because life experience is very different in different countries. And so when the person from Pakistan talks to the person in Iran, who talks to the person living in Seattle, Washington about a topic, they grow. And so here's a big, bold idea I just love to hear more about. I think facilitation of these kinds of classrooms is fantastic. And I knew that there were some initiatives with USAID when I was a kid to do international classrooms. They were mainly to promote English back in the day, but the main idea was to invite these international forums of fourth graders who would just use English to talk. But it changed people's lives, just contact, because we know some of the world's biggest problems are just these inherent biases that we have, and that you can't teach that away. You have to actually live it. You have to experience being with others before you can reduce that bias. And so getting people together, I see a very wonderful, a potentially wonderful role for UNESCO to facilitate those kinds of continued educational experiences with kids from around the world, so that from an early age, they appreciate these things. They appreciate their heritage. They appreciate the others that are in the world, as opposed to just being so, centralized in their own education system. So anyways, just wanted to thank you for the resources that already exist, and wonder if there are any other plans in line of education to maybe facilitate or support other initiatives that have to do with global classrooms.
Well, thank you very much, Tracy. I'm not at UNESCO now, but I think indeed UNESCO did a great job during this pandemic, and particularly the education sector, because I'm trying to follow it, really did great in launching some of the research, some recommendations also for that. And I would say keeping overall this feeling of education being vital in this recovery with digital platforms and others. I do agree with you that in as much as I'm participating in many similar debates, that kids learn differently. And it is sometimes a challenge, but also a great opportunity with the new technologies. Now they speak about AI and how it will also empower teachers and kids to have access to these new ways of learning and being a little bit more personal, to develop their personal skills. I think it's a huge opportunity. Now, speaking about the classrooms, I think it's a great idea. Of course, it very much depends on how you organize this. As you said, there are so many biases, prejudices, stereotyping in the world, and children and young people, usually they don't. And I think speaking about extremist feelings or others, nobody's born a racist or an extremist or with some xenophobic mind. It is afterwards they acquire this. So it's really, really vital. This kind of education for values, it's critical. And this is where I once again come back to the goal number 4. It is already inscribed into the Sustainable Development Agenda. Just governments have to be pushed in their education systems to incorporate this in the curricular, in teaching, in other ways, so that these inherent human values are embedded into these education systems. And I know, because it's once again, to just jump a little bit into the culture and heritage, when the destruction of heritage started in Syria and Iraq, and we launched for the first time at that time a social network campaign, which was Unite for Heritage called, and it was mostly oriented towards young people. It was a platform for them to share experiences. And it was the impact was really great. There were millions of young people from all different parts of the world. They were sharing their own heritage, their own experiences. They were regrouping. They were talking to each other. And the idea was to give a different narrative totally opposed to the extremist kind of thinking or exclusive kind of thinking that at the end of the day, we are the same human beings, and it's important that we share everything that we have. And once again, education is vital. And I think that this type of classroom should be supported more by the international development community. Because at the end of the day, international development community in very many instances is introducing this type of values and projects.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you, Tracy, for the question. We have Pascal next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Irina. Very interesting presentation. I have two questions. The first one is about restitution, because it's a very complicated topic. You were talking about culture and how culture is important for peace and for also identity and for, so what's your take on that? I know it's a very sensitive subject, restitution of work of arts. A number of countries are claiming that they should be given back what was either stolen from them officially or unofficially. Sometimes it was sold, but by people who were the people who sold it. So that's my first question. And the second question you were talking about, and you're very right, access to information and access to internet. But there's another question, which is access to real information. In a world of fake news and alternative facts, I don't really know what it means, because before we used to call it simply lies, but now it's called alternative reality. Well, that's strange. But I see that there's also a huge problem of education, educating kids to recognize truth from lies. And I think this is a real big problem with social networks now, that the access to information is very different from what I knew when I was young. Now you're only fed with information that go in the sense that you want to go. And so you have, in fact, very restricted access to information, contrary to what people think on the social network. So what could we do to make sure that kids have the right tools to be able to judge and to navigate in this very, very complex world of fake information? We've seen in the recent past in this country what it led to. And so I would like to have your take on that as well.
Well, thank you very much, Pascal, for these questions. I wish I had the perfect answers for both of them, the silver bullet, because both questions are important. And I would probably start with the last one, because I think it's very much linked to what we discussed. You're entirely right that when a kid goes into the internet, it's a totally open world where he goes without a guidance. In our lives, we have our children, we tell them, take them by hand, and we say, you don't cross the street on a red light, you cross the street on a green light, and then you teach all different kind of, so to say, life science of behavior and what is right and what is wrong. In the internet, of course, the opportunities are huge, but also the challenges and the threats for young people are equally huge. Now, I think there are a lot of discussions about whether to make some kind of a regulation and what to do with it. I think I'm trying to look also at the positive side of it. I think once again, children have to be educated to make the difference between the truth and the fake or the lie or untruth. Only, I think, citizens who have critical thinking can make their own right decisions. And this is what education, once again, has to be. It's not just about information. I think nowadays, because information is everywhere, the role of the educational systems, the schools, and it is about values. It is about the way to look at what to do with this information and how to use this information also for a different cause. It's not about information like we did in our young years of schooling, memorizing and doing. It's totally different. And this is also the role of the teachers is being changed. They're kind of moderating and guiding kids into this world. So I really believe that the way out is to make this type of critical thinking of young people so that they know where to go. What worries me with internet also is the fragmentation of the communities and societies, what has been created, and not only young people, but predominantly young people with the Facebook and the Twitter, Instagram and all this, the way that they start to live within their own community. And I think it's important also to look at the broader community feeling. And this is where we have to go out, so to say, outside the social networks in order to have it. Now, with the question about the restitution, now it's I would say it's a broader question. They call it restitution or return, because restitution is when you have usually taken something illegally. And it's very interesting because President Macron commissioned a report 3 years ago already. There are two professors, Sarr and Sylvain. One is the French, another from Senegal. And they presented a very interesting report where it's a report with many recommendations, but if I may sum up of it, they, of course, are pleading for the return of the stolen, and I insist on that, of the stolen property, because this was created, this report, because of the Benin bronze, more than 20 Benin bronze, which were taken from the palace by the French troops at that time and brought here to the museum in France. Now, at the same time, they are pleading, and I think it's very important to create partnerships and also to train, to create museums, to train the curators and people for their protection, because the counter argument is that if these objects go back, there is nowhere to place them. So I think the question about what to do with cultural objects in colonial context, if I may put it broader, because there are objects which have been bought legally, Iranian museums, there are those who have been stolen. There are all different kinds of circumstances. I think one size does not fit all, but definitely stolen objects which have been taken have to go back. I think it gives a lot of support for the identity building of many of these countries, a sense of belonging, a sense of pride. I think this is very important. And all by the resistance of many museums, the tendency definitely is there. Now, I don't believe there is another counter argument. Who say that if we do this, museums will be empty. They won't be empty. I don't think that museums will be empty. And I don't think that the argument, here we present all the diversity of the cultures of the big museums. Come and see, everybody, it's a dialogue among cultures. I think this argument does not weigh against I would say, the good that will be done if such objects are being returned. So in most of the countries, I know Germany prepared a very interesting report also, very bold report, which takes a very forward-looking steps in this regard. And of course, France here and others, this is a debate that will continue to go. And at the end of the day, I think that people have to have what they really belongs to them. It doesn't mean that we want to close in our own cultures, not at all. But such crimes, because I consider these to be crimes, have to be rectified, and there should not be impunity.
Thank you very much, Irina, for the very thoughtful question to what was a complex, difficult question. Thank you. And it's almost 1 hour, and I'm aware that it's 9 p.m. in Paris for you. But if you allow me, I'd like to ask you one final question before we finish. That has got to do with the United States and the new Biden administration. I think a lot of people are aware that the US has left UNESCO twice. Do you think the new Biden administration will change the US stance on UNESCO? And if it does decide to rejoin, would it make any difference to UNESCO's work?
My simple answer is I hope so. And of course, it will change because at the end of the day, we need the universality of the organization. UNESCO is not universal nowadays when we have the US, Israel is not a member either. On the other side, I would say that it will bring a lot more in terms of looking at the challenges nowadays in the world and being this place of negotiations. United Nations is made not that everybody agrees on everything. This is multilateralism. Some countries have to give in something, but to look at the common public good, I think it's important, such as peace, security, sustainable development, gender equality, human rights. I think all these are important. And to be very frank, I don't see any discrepancy between UNESCO's main priorities and mandates, what they're doing, and the, I would say, interests, national interests also of the American people. I just want to mention that the US stopped paying to UNESCO, suspended payment at UNESCO in 2011 when Palestine joined the organization because of two laws that were adopted in the 90s. It was not a deliberate decision by the then administration Obama, and they left UNESCO only in 2017 with the previous administration of Mr. Trump. Now, the difficulty may be into the arrears, and I'm not naive from that point of view. There were arrears that were accumulated because US was member of UNESCO but not paying its dues. But I think if there is a political will, this question will be solved. I really hope the US will come back because there are a lot of challenges ahead and every single member counts when it comes to solving these issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irina, for your time, for sharing your thoughts, and also for ending on a very hopeful note the future of UNESCO's work and the importance of UNESCO's work in culture and education. I want to read a small note from the ambassador of Eritrea. She said she has to leave, but she would like to thank you. She says that Eritrea's capital, Asmara, made the World Heritage Site list under your tenure at UNESCO, and they in Eritrea have fond memories of that day in 2017. So she thanks you for that.
I remember that vividly when it was inscribed.
So all it remains is for me to thank you very much on behalf of the Women's International Forum for giving us your time and your thoughts. So thank you. And we hope to see you again in person to speak to us at the UN. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zarina, and thank all of you for spending this time, your thoughtful questions. It's a huge topic, so I really enjoyed being with you. And thank you, Pascal, also for your so kind presentation. Merci infiniment, vraiment.
Merci, Irina. À très bientôt. Très, très bientôt.
À très bientôt, j'espère bien.
Thank you.